The ledger hit the floor before anyone realized she had fallen. Clara Dunn's chair rolled sideways and her forehead caught the edge of her desk, with a sound that brought 2 security guards sprinting from the hallway. A co-worker, Dottie, screamed her name from across the accounting suite. Someone grabbed a phone. Someone else was already on his knees beside her, pressing 2 fingers against Clara's wrist and saying quietly that her pulse was there but weak. She had been at that desk for 19 hours. The Meridian Club on Commonwealth Avenue had never been a place where people talked about what they saw. It was the kind of establishment where the bourbon was 20 years old. The private dining rooms were soundproof, and the men who filled its leather chairs made decisions that never appeared in any newspaper. The accounting suite on the 4th floor was quieter still. 3 staff members managing books for what the IRS recognized as a high-end hospitality group, and what everyone else understood was something considerably more complicated. Clara had worked there for 4 years. She had never been late. She had never complained. She had never once asked her supervisor, a man named Prescott, whether the hours being assigned to her were legal. She hadn't needed to ask. She already knew the answer. A door at the far end of the hall opened. The security guards straightened. Dottie stepped back. Even the colleague pressing his fingers to Clara's wrist went still without meaning to. Brennan Solis walked in the way he always walked, like the room had been built around him, and every other person in it was furniture. He was 41 years old, dark-haired, and had the kind of face that made experienced men choose their words very carefully. He ran the Solis organization through 7 legitimate businesses and an arrangement with half the city's political infrastructure that nobody discussed out loud. The Meridian Club was the cleanest of his holdings, and, according to every account, the one he trusted most. He had been in the building late reviewing a contract when he heard Dottie scream. He crossed the room in 8 steps and crouched beside Clara without a word. He looked at her. For a moment, the papers scattered around her. The reading glasses knocked sideways on her face, the coffee cup that had gone cold hours ago. And then he looked up at the guard standing nearest to him. Who is she? Clara Dunn, sir. Senior bookkeeper. She's been here since. Get my car. The guard hesitated. Sir, should we call? Get my car. He looked down at Clara again. The color had gone out of her face entirely. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. And tell Dr. Hennessy to meet us at the Fairfax Clinic. Private entrance. He lifted her himself. Nobody offered to help. Nobody suggested a different plan. Slade, his head of security, appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later and took one look at his boss, carrying an unconscious woman in both arms with a particular kind of steadiness that meant don't say anything. And wisely said nothing. The private clinic on Fairfax Street was accustomed to unusual arrivals. The physician on staff, a compact man named Hennessy, who had treated 3 gunshot wounds in the past year without filing a single report, was waiting with a gurney when the black SUV pulled through the back gate. He took one look at Clara and started issuing instructions before they had her fully through the door. Dehydrated. Blood pressures bottomed out. He checked her eyes, her pulse, the tension in her jaw. How long has she been like this? I don't know, Solis said. Hennessy glanced at him. In 11 years of working for this man, he had never heard Solis admit he didn't know something. He filed that away and went to work. Solis stood in the hallway outside the room and did not move for a long time. He was not a man given to uncertainty. He had walked away from burning buildings without looking back. He had sat at negotiating tables with men who were actively planning to kill him and closed the deal anyway. He had spent the better part of 2 decades constructing a version of himself that had no use for feelings that couldn't be leveraged. But watching through the window as the nurses connected an IV line to the wrist of a woman he had barely spoken to, he felt something he didn't have a name for. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was something quieter and considerably more difficult to dismiss. Hennessy came out 40 minutes later. She'll recover. But if she'd gone another 12 hours like this, he stopped. Chose his words. It would have been a different conversation. Solis took out his phone. His assistant picked up on the first ring. Clear tomorrow, a pause, and the day after, and pull every timesheet from the Meridian accounting department. Past year, every overtime record, every schedule change, every shift that ran over. I'm not interested in what Prescott approved. I want to know what actually happened. He hung up and went back to standing in the hallway. A nurse came out at one point and told him, gently, that he didn't have to stay. He thanked her politely and didn't move. By morning, the records covered a table in the clinic's small conference room. Solis went through them himself. He had people for this kind of work, but he found, uncharacteristically, that he wanted to see it with his own eyes. What he saw made him set down his coffee. Clara Dunn had worked an average of 63 hours per week for 14 consecutive months. She had covered shifts for 3 different colleagues. She had come in on holidays, stayed through nights, and taken on work that Prescott assigned her with the cheerful expectation that she would handle it without objection. She had, in fact, never objected. He called Prescott at 7 in the morning. Prescott answered with the careful brightness of a man who had been awake for hours, waiting for exactly this. He talked for 30 seconds. Solis listened long enough to hear a variation of "she never said anything," and "she always seemed fine," which told him everything he needed to know, and hung up. He called Slade instead. Pull Prescott's performance reviews, everything he's signed off on in the past 2 years, and find out if anyone in that department ever raised a concern that went nowhere. Already started, Slade said. There's more. Solis waited. The Meridian books from 18 months ago. Someone tried to run a slow skim through the vendor accounts. Small amounts, irregular intervals. Hard to catch. A pause. Somebody caught it. Who? Clara Dunn. She flagged it internally, quietly. No escalation, no noise. Just corrected the entries and left a note in the file coded well enough that anyone without her system wouldn't have understood what they were looking at. Slade cleared his throat. If she hadn't caught it, we'd have been looking at a 6-figure discrepancy right around the time the Harrington Group was doing due diligence on the partnership deal. Solis was quiet for a moment. The Harrington Group's due diligence had been thorough and hostile. A discrepancy of that size would have ended the partnership and the cover it provided entirely. She protected us, he said, and she never told anyone. Not a word. He sat with that. Then, why does she need the money? The overtime? What's it for? Slade told him. Clara's mother was in a memory care facility in Newton. Had been for 3 years. The bills were substantial and climbing. Clara was the only family member listed as financially responsible. Her father had left when she was 12. Her younger brother was in college on a partial scholarship. She had quietly contributed to every semester. Every extra dollar Clara Dunn had earned in 19 months of excessive overtime had gone somewhere other than herself. She woke slowly, the way people do when the body has finally decided to stop negotiating. The room was pale and quiet. A lamp on the side table put out a warm light, and beside her, she blinked. Brennan Solis was sitting 4 feet away with a folder open in his lap, and the particular stillness of a man who had been there for some time. Her first instinct was to sit up. Her second instinct, arriving approximately 1 second later when the room tilted, was to reconsider. Don't, his voice was even, the nurse said slow. Clara settled back against the pillow. She became aware, in a crawling and mortifying way, that she was wearing a hospital gown and had no memory of how she had gotten here. IV line on her left wrist, hospital bracelet, a small bruise near her elbow from the blood draw. Her mouth was dry. She tried again. I'm sorry. Was I supposed to? Did I miss something? The Fairfield variance report was due at 9, and I don't think I finished the second. Clara. She stopped. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not quite warm, not cold either. Something in between, like a man who has just realized he has been standing in front of an open window for too long. You apologized, he said, before you asked where you were. She opened her mouth. You're in a clinic. You collapsed last night. You've been here since. He paused. Stop worrying about the Fairfield report. But the deadline. I moved it. He said it, the way he said everything, like the decision had been made before the conversation started. The report can wait. Clara stared at him. In 4 years of working within the Meridian Club's orbit, she had exchanged perhaps 12 sentences total with Brennan Solis. He was not the kind of man who noticed bookkeepers. Why are you here? She asked. The question came out before she could shape it into something more professional. He considered. You work for me. Lots of people work for you. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, in a way that seemed almost involuntary, you caught the vendor discrepancy 18 months ago. She went very still. You caught it, he said. And you fixed it quietly, and you didn't ask for anything in return. Not recognition, not a bonus, not even a conversation. He closed the folder. I would like to know why. Clara looked at her hands. I thought it was the right thing to do. For an organization you had no guarantee would protect you. I knew what the organization was when I took the job. And yet, she agreed softly. The room was quiet for a moment. A monitor beeped. Somewhere outside in the corridor, a cart rolled past. Your mother is at Whispering Pines in Newton, Solis said. It was not a question. Memory care unit. 3 years. Clara's breath caught. She had told no one at work. She had been so careful. I'm not going to use that against you, he said, and there was something in his voice, flat and absolute, like a line drawn in concrete, that made her believe him immediately. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I know why you've been working the hours you've been working, and I want to know. He stopped. For the first time, he seemed to choose his words with some difficulty. I want to know why you believed destroying your own health was easier than asking someone for help. A tear slid down Clara's face before she caught it. She pressed the back of her hand to her cheek, embarrassed. Nobody asks, she said quietly. In that building, you carry your own weight. You don't show Prescott you're drowning because he takes it as proof you shouldn't have been hired. And I needed the job. She paused. I've always needed the job. Solis said nothing for a moment. Then, Prescott no longer works for me. She looked up. The review was already overdue. He stood, which placed him at his full height, which was considerable. But he didn't move closer, as if he understood she needed the distance. You're going to rest here for 2 days. Your medical costs are covered. When you return to the Meridian, your schedule will be different, and your mother's facility costs will be managed through a foundation account, retroactive to 3 months ago, anonymous. No debt attached. Clara opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes were filling faster than she could manage. I can't accept that. You protected my organization when you had no obligation to. Something quiet and unexpectedly direct moved across his face. Call it a correction. The Meridian Club's annual benefactors' dinner was held 6 weeks later in the Grand Hall on the 2nd floor. A room with high ceilings and windows overlooking the garden, the kind of event where money changed hands gracefully and good intentions provided excellent cover for complicated arrangements. Clara almost didn't come. She was back at work on a schedule that no longer required her to eat dinner at her desk, and she had told herself repeatedly that the dinner was for people whose names appeared on the donor wall. Not for her. A woman named Harriet Boone. Prescott's former deputy, now technically the interim operations manager, found Clara near the coat check within 10 minutes of her arriving. Harriet had always reminded Clara of a particular type of cold front, efficient, impersonal, and arriving without warning. "I was surprised you came," Harriet said pleasantly, "given everything." Clara kept her voice neutral. "It's a company event." "Of course." Harriet tilted her head. "Though I do think it's important to be honest. People have been talking. The schedule changes, the foundation account, the sudden attention from Mr. Solis." Her smile stayed exactly in place. "Some of them are asking how someone in your position ended up with that kind of interest." Several guests nearby had gone quiet. "I understand the curiosity," Clara said carefully. "Do you?" Harriet lowered her voice in a way specifically designed to carry. "Because, from where most of us are standing, collapsing at your desk looks like a very effective career move. For a woman with your—" She paused, letting the silence do the work her words didn't need to. "Particular situation." The implication settled over the room like a pressure drop. Clara felt it in her chest, the old familiar weight, the same one she had learned to carry since the night her former fiancé had explained to her, with genuine patience, as though he were being kind. "You're lovely, Clara, but I need someone who doesn't make people look twice. You understand." She had driven home alone and sat in the parking lot of her apartment building for 40 minutes before her face was composed enough to go inside. She had learned to carry that weight. She had simply learned to carry it quietly, the way she carried everything. She was still forming a response when the guests near the door shifted. Brennan Solis crossed the room in 12 steps. He stopped beside Clara, not in front of her, beside her. The distinction mattered. He looked at Harriet with an expression that had no temperature in it whatsoever. "Repeat what you just said," he said. "To me." Harriet's confidence made one last attempt to hold. "I was simply making an observation." "You were suggesting," he said, with the kind of precision that made every person in earshot stop moving, "that a woman who caught a significant financial threat to this organization, who worked more than 60 hours a week for over a year without complaint, who paid her mother's medical bills alone, and who never once asked for recognition, that this woman somehow manipulated her way into basic human fairness." Harriet said nothing. 18 months ago, he continued, and now he was speaking to the room, not dramatically, not loudly, but in the way that made every person present understand the words were for them. Someone attempted to steal from this organization through the vendor accounts. It was designed to be difficult to catch. It worked at every level except one. He did not look at Clara yet. One person in the accounting department noticed an irregularity, corrected it, and documented it in a way that protected us from exposure during a critical period. She did not ask for credit. She did not mention it to anyone. She simply did it because it was right. The room was entirely still. She then worked impossible hours to cover for an understaffed department because the alternative was watching her colleagues fail. She did this while managing her mother's care alone, while helping pay for her brother's education, while working for a supervisor who had been failing his team for 2 years and who I should have replaced considerably sooner. He turned to Clara then. Something in his face had shifted, not softened exactly, but opened, in the way a window opens and admits weather. "The Meridian Club owes you more than it has given you," he said quietly, "and I should have seen that sooner." He extended his hand. Not an employer's obligatory gesture, something else, a straightforward, uncomplicated offer. "Stand here, with me, in front of all of them." Clara placed her hand in his. The applause that started at the back of the room came from the staff members who had known her for years, people who began clapping before they'd decided to, because the body sometimes understands what the mind is still catching up to. It spread forward. Several guests stood, One older woman near the window was crying in the cheerful, helpless way people cry at things that are simply true. Harriet Boone did not stay to see the end of it. The memo went out the following Monday morning. Overtime caps. A formal review process for schedule assignments. Anonymous HR reporting that went directly to Solis's office rather than through a departmental supervisor. Paid leave provisions that had existed on paper for years and been systematically ignored by people like Prescott now carried actual consequence. Managers would be evaluated not only on output, but on the well-being of their teams. It was the kind of policy change that senior executives quietly admitted they had never seen Solis personally involve himself in before. Every proposal came back with handwritten notes in the margins. No employee should feel that asking for help ends their career here. Supervisors are responsible for noticing exhaustion before it becomes a crisis. The board understood, without being told, where those notes had come from. 3 weeks after the memo, Clara was offered the newly created position of Director of Employee Operations. She said no twice. The second no was firmly declined. She took the office 2 floors above the accounting suite in a corner room with windows facing the garden. She kept the windows. She kept the small framed photo of her mother on the desk, the one from a Sunday 6 weeks ago when her mother had looked up, recognized her face, and said her name. Solis did not make a habit of lingering near the compliance corridor, but he developed what the remaining staff tactfully described as a recurring need to walk through it at approximately 8 in the morning. Sometimes he stopped, sometimes he didn't. Clara found, over the weeks that followed, that the difference between those 2 kinds of mornings was something she had started paying close attention to. One afternoon in late November, he came to her office with a staffing proposal she had requested, standard, unremarkable, and stayed long after the document had been placed on the desk, and the conversation about the document had naturally run its course. The city outside the window was grey and patient. "You never mentioned the vendor accounts," he said eventually. "Not once. In 4 years." "It wasn't my story to tell," she said. "It was yours to notice. And if I hadn't, you would have eventually." She looked at him. "You notice everything. You just don't always say so." He was quiet for a moment. Then, in a way that was not entirely smooth, "I'm not good at this." She waited. "I've spent 20 years being the kind of man people make room for. It's useful." He stopped. Something moved across his face, quick and unguarded. "You don't make room for me. You just talk to me like I'm a person." Clara smiled before she could stop it. "Is that a complaint?" "No," he said it like a fact, without decoration. "It isn't." The afternoon light lay flat across the desk between them. "My mother had a good Sunday," Clara said after a moment. "The doctors say these windows aren't unusual with her condition. But she recognized me. She said my name." She paused. "I sat with her for 3 hours. I don't think I've done that in 2 years without checking my phone every 20 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad you had that. I know you called Whispering Pines about the room upgrade. The foundation account. Brennan." She used his first name without planning to. It had been happening more often lately, and he had never once corrected her. The foundation account didn't specify a room upgrade. That was you. He looked out the window at the grey November garden, at the bare beds and the patient ground, at the end of autumn, holding its shape. "She raised someone worth noticing," he said quietly. "That seemed worth something." Clara felt the words settle somewhere unguarded. She had spent a long time believing that the people who loved her would eventually find the weight too much to carry. Her father, the fiancé who needed someone who didn't make people look twice. Every person who had accepted her help and quietly adjusted to expecting it. She had learned to make herself useful. She had learned to make herself small. And somewhere in the architecture of those 2 habits, She had lost the belief that someone might simply choose to stay. "I used to think being dependable meant carrying everything alone," she said. He turned from the window. "I thought if I ever stopped." She stopped herself. Tried again. "I thought if I ever let anyone see how tired I actually was, they'd realize I wasn't worth the trouble." He crossed the small distance between them and reached across the desk, turning his hand upward. The same gesture as the dinner. The same clear and unhurried offer. "Choose. No obligation. Choose." "You are," he said, and his voice had something in it she had not heard before. Something unarmored. Something that had clearly cost him. "The most worth it person I have ever been too slow to notice." Clara looked at his open hand for a moment. Then she placed hers in it. Outside, the last of November settled over Commonwealth Avenue like a long exhale. The garden below held its ground, bare, unhurried, already planning for everything that came after the cold. Neither of them let go.